Well, thank you everyone for joining today. And I would really like to introduce Diane Smith. She has a wealth of knowledge with the IB. She has joined IPSO with us this year, the MYP group. So she might be a familiar face to some of you to discuss IDU units, but we are welcoming her here for ATL Skills Planning, which is great because we know that's across the continuum. So I'm seeing a lot of new names, ones that are not typically in our MYP IPSO group, but this is what I love about IPSO. This is what I love about the virtual. We can all come together. So it's really good to see, even in the chat, from DP, PYP, CP. So thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to pass it off to Diane. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Melissa. It's such a pleasure to be here. And me too. I'm really excited that this has a sort of a continuum group here, because as I'll talk about in just a minute, this has been such a struggle. I mean, I started as coordinator over about 20 years ago, and planning out the vertical scope and sequence of our ATL skills was always a bear, and we had such a struggle figuring it out. And this session, I'm very excited about. It's the first time I've done it in 90 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna a little bit of a speed race, and if there's any parts that were just a little too quick or you want to hear more about, feel free to put a question in the Q&A document that's on the Padlet and say, oh, could you say more about this? But know that you will have this recording and also the presentation slides. So welcome everybody. If you participated in the IDU webinar last month with the MYP, you'll already know a little bit about my IB background. But I want to just say, related to ATL skills, I was a coordinator for 13 years in a continuum school, PYP to DP. And the other, like I said, the other coordinators and I just struggled with trying to find a way to create a coherent, consistent approach for planning ATL skill development across the whole continuum. And then I've been a member since about 2010, and I was co-developing what is an IB education workshop on social emotional learning. And in considering the ATL skills that support SEL across the whole continuum, I had to really dive into what are those commonalities and differences in the way that ATL skills are presented in each program, and was surprised to find out that there were some big differences. So I was also part of a team that redeveloped the learner profile workshop that also spans all IB programs and considers how ATL skills align with and support the learner profile attributes. So those experiences, as well as the many versions that we tried as a continuum school, are what went into, had a big influence. They went into like framing my thinking about this and on all of the ideas that we'll consider today. So I also want to put a little plug in for my YouTube channel. There's a whole bunch of resources on there, mostly for MYP. So haven't done too many videos about the continuum, but if there's something that you're interested in, having a little short, my favorite thing to do is making animated videos. So if you have some topic you'd like to have a little short intro video, let me know. You can email me. That would be fun to do. All right. So before we get started, I know that you probably, Tuesday afternoon, you probably have a lot on your minds and hearts. And it's important that we practice a foundational ATL skill and just check in with ourselves. This is just a personal pause. We're not going to share out, to check in on your overall well-being in terms of what's going on in your mind, your heart, and your body. It's called Mind, Body, Heart Check-In. And so just take a moment to notice the type of thoughts that you're experiencing right now, or in the hour or so leading up to this moment. What kind of thoughts have you been having? How's your heart feeling? Is it strong? Is it calm? Is it agitated? Is it stressed? And what's going on with your physical body? Do you feel energized, fatigued, achy somewhere? Just breathe and notice those 3 areas of well-being. And think about how those thoughts, feelings, and sensations may be combining to affect your overall well-being. Look at that scale of faces, and in the chat, enter the number of the face that corresponds to something about how you're feeling in general. You might be feeling something different degrees of well-being in different areas of your life. And if we were a well-established group, we would share. But for now, we're just going to get a sense of how the whole group is doing. Oh, Jadit, you're happy. You're number one. Nice. Wow, everyone's on the upper end of the scale. When we do this in person, if we see somebody down in the 4s or 5s or even in the 3s, we know that they could benefit from us sharing a little bit of our up energy with them. Yeah, keeping an eye out for each other as a community. So, we are online and we can't really reach out to those of you who are down in the 4s and haven't seen anybody in total panic in a 5, so that's a good sign. But just send some thoughts out to people who are feeling a little bit more stressed or down, had experiences that are having them feel that way. And to help us let go of any of those distracting thoughts and feelings, we're going to take a moment to bring our focus to the present and do a little mindfulness strategy called 3x5 breathing. It's just breathing in to the count of 3 and breathing out naturally to a count of 5. A little bit more out than in. It's nothing forced. You're just bringing your attention to your breath. So if you're comfortable doing so, close your eyes. And if you're not, relax your eyes and look down. And we'll just take 3 breaths. It's real quick. So breathing in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 2 more breaths, counting to yourself. 3 on the in and 5 on the out. We're going to jump right in. We're going to consider 3 key mind shifts or new understandings about ATL skills planning. So then we're going to look at 3 action steps that are based on those 3 mind shifts. Customizing the ATL skills, identifying skill strategies, and mapping skill strategies. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. And like I said, because we got a little bit of a late start, I'll be willing to stay a little bit longer to have time for those Q&As. So, as I said, I haven't done this before online in 90 minutes. I've done it with a lot of schools over a period of weeks online or in person over the course of a day. So there will be important elements that we won't have time for. We'll be moving quickly through some sections. But again, you'll have this recording and the slides to revisit those parts. Quick note, the information in this session is guided by published IB information. By that, I mean that there are IB grounded rationales for everything in this session, but you won't find specific IB references to some of the steps I'm going to present. These are things we came up with, and there's not much published IB guidance. You will need to check with your program representative to see if the adaptations noted in purple in this session can be used in a single program IB school. I'm going to point out those elements along the way. So I don't want to steer you wrong if your particular site visit team has a certain viewpoint. Don't want to get you in some hot water. So as you know, there's a Padlet of resources for this session. This is what's in it. You find the Q&A document, and you can use this document during the session, or you can enter questions in the chat, and Melissa will keep track of the questions for me to respond to at the end. So this document is going to be editable for a week through February 22nd, and you can keep entering questions, and I will provide a brief response, just like I did to Amrit's question. We only got that one question prior to the session, so I wasn't really sure where your areas of question would be. But after the 22nd, the document will be view only, and you can feel free to email me directly if you have specific questions later on. Like if you are trying to implement what we go over here today and you have a question, feel free to email. Okay, what else is in the Padlet is a 3-minute animated video, Introduction to ATL Skills. It's aimed at students, but it could also work for faculty and parents. There's also 2 slide decks, one with a few basics about ATL skills and another with some reminders about terminology and organization of ATL skills, vertical planning. I'll also be adding resources after the session, this slide deck, a recording of the session, links to some planning templates that are ready to go for you to make copies of, and a few example documents from the schools that I've worked with. All right, so just so that I can get an idea of what you have been able to access in the Padlet, we're going to do a numeric check-in in the chat. So open up the chat, and if you were able to read or view all of the resources, I only put 3 this time, unlike the IDU one, put a 3 and so on down to 0 if you weren't able to access any of the resources yet. That's fine. It's just to help me understand what you may have already reviewed. Lots of 3s, 2s, couple 1s. So there's a nice spread. And those of you who are down in the 1s know that that Padlet will be available to you to catch up on. So if there's anything in here that you'd like a little bit more on, you can always go back and look in the Padlet. All right, I'd also like to get a quick idea of who's with us today. I did see that in the introductions a little bit, but I'd love to see a little bit more tangible representation of that. So in the chat, enter the number or numbers. If you're involved in more than one program, enter the number or numbers that you are involved in. Oh, lots of PYP, MYP, a few diploma. All right. And now we're going to do just a little poll. We're really trying to get to know a little bit, getting a feel of the lay of the land here. I'd like to get an idea how you perceive ATL planning to be going at your school or in your IB program. Do you think that you have all your ATL ducks in a row, so to speak, or is it a little bit all over the place? So I'm going to share a poll, and you're going to consider 5 questions and select from the provided responses. They're all anonymous, so there won't be anybody checking up on what you put in the poll. But here's the first one, so you can think about it before I head you over to the poll. First question prompt is ATL planning in my school is, and then there's like 4 options or 5. Just beginning, sketched out, but not too useful yet. Fairly well mapped out, but could use further development to make it more useful. Excellent. We have a complete scope and sequence. It's super helpful. Or if there's some other answer that doesn't quite cover it, you can put other. These are the other questions. And you'll select the answer that fits best in terms of the degree to which that particular statement is true. If you are a coordinator or administrative type school leader and you're not a classroom teacher, you can still answer. Question 2, in terms of how frequently you participate in horizontal or grade level team meetings related to ATL skills. Question 3, how often you participate in vertical or subject group team meetings. And number 4 applies to everyone. And then number 5 would be in terms of how often you refer to or suggest the use of specific ATL skills strategies, say during meetings, emails, or other communications with faculty, students, and parents. So I'm going to put that poll up there. I think when you're filling that, we're completing that, it's something to think about is who is it that needs to be aware of and conversant in ATL skill development. Ideally, everyone in the school. The crossing guards, the lunchroom, the admin, the everyone because they're really about human development. And the more that ATL skills are embedded in the vocabulary and the practices across the whole school, the more that specific skill strategies are used by adults and students alike, the more effective the use and transfer of ATL skills will be. There are 2 preliminary steps before developing or redeveloping your ATL skills across a multi-program IB school. These were described in the Padlet slide deck, so we're just going to review quickly. 1, create shared ATL terminology across all IB programs, and 2, customize the ATL organizational structure to what works best for you. I put the second step in purple because that's an adaptation that I have found to be critical in creating an effective ATL continuum. But again, if you're a single program school, you'll need to check and see if making modifications to the organizational structure is supported by your IB program. I asked a whole bunch of my IBIN friends who are site visitors now. I haven't done it in a few years, just with COVID and being so far away. But there was a range of opinions. So there is no commonality in either PYP site visitors or MYP site visitors on whether you can change out those skill clusters. So I believe that there's a strong rationale for it, and I would make an argument for it, but I don't want to get you in trouble. So you need to check with your consultant or your site visit team about that. Okay, so we'll start with the terminology that describes each level in an ATL organizational structure. As was noted in the Padlet slide deck, each program uses slightly different terminology and structures for organizing ATL skills. Again, we want to support effective communication and a collaboration across all programs. So it helps to use consistent ATL terminology and organizational structures. The first term we need to share an understanding of is skill. Pretty basic. It's the learned capacity to carry out desired results, or it can be thought of as the ability to choose, important word, and effectively and efficiently repeat a technique when it's needed. So something important to take note of in these definitions is that being able to select and then carry out a skill requires having a conscious awareness of it. I know I have this skill, I'm going to choose to use it. So in order to support students in becoming independent in their use of ATL skills, we'd like them to be able to think about something they need to do, to recognize when a type of skill is needed. For instance, I need to take notes to help me remember this. It's a conscious thought. Then we'd like them to be able to consider explicitly in their minds, which of the strategies I've learned should I use? Which one would fit best? Which one do I like best? In order to support this type of explicit thinking, it's helpful for students to have named strategies to choose from. So they're thinking, which of these note-taking strategies should I use right now? Hi, remember I've learned bubble mind maps, I've learned timeline mind maps, I've learned Cornell notes, I've learned colored pen outlines. So you have these named strategies. And in brain research, it helps for students to develop efficient neural pathways of skill retrieval if teachers can consistently use the same ATL language and skill organization structures across the whole continuum. So we know that there are 5 basic categories of ATL skills. These same 5 categories are identified for all IB programs across the continuum. Just a little bit of a side note, this is in all program guides. It's noted that although the skill areas are presented as distinct categories, there's obviously closed links and areas of overlap between them. And it's intended that these categories should be seen as interrelated. So this is an important side note in all the guides. when we start considering the types of skills that are identified in each category. Know that putting a skill into a category helps us organize and simplify our planning. It does not mean that that skill might not also be relevant in a different category, but for organization, you're just going to list it once. So in the MYP one, you'll see give and receive meaningful feedback under 2 categories. It's not that it doesn't apply to both social and communication, but for organizational purposes and tracking and mapping and making sure you have a continuum of strategies for providing feedback and receiving feedback, we're just going to put it in one. So that's where that side note comes in handy. So here's what the organization looks like in MYP publications. I'm going to use the MYP ATL table as a visual reference. I'll also be noting PYP and DP guidance, but since the MYP provides the most detailed examples, it's a good starting point for considering a school's organizational structure, no matter what program you're involved in. You'll be able to modify, add, delete skills to be developmentally appropriate, but starting with the MYP long list might be the way to go because you'll have more to analyze and choose from. So you can see that this table shows the skill category, social skills. The next level of organization is labeled as a skill cluster in the MYP guidance. And while the DP doesn't provide tables, it also refers to clusters of skills associated with each skill category. In the PYP guidance, this level is labeled a sub-skill. Okay, so for the purposes of this session, I'm going to refer to this level of ATL organization as skill clusters. But if you are planning across a continuum, your school can decide what you will call this level in all programs. So if you decide sub-skill is a better title for this level of organization, then you'll be calling it that across all programs so that you can have communication about them. As the category is broken down into smaller and smaller subsets of skill types, the next level of organization is just called skills in the DP and MYP guides. However, in MYP workshops and some support resources, it's referred to as skill indicators. These skills indicate that somebody is demonstrating collaboration skills, right? They're called skill indicators. Again, in a continuum school, it will aid communication and collaboration if all programs use the same term. In the PYP, it's not really called, but the thing at the top of their table is what students do. Okay, so in this session, I'm going to refer to this level of ATL organization as skill indicators. The final level of organization is not identified by the IB, but skill strategies are referred to in all programs. This is the level that I have found to be having the most tangible impact on ATL skill development. And this is where each school identifies the specific skill strategies that will be explicitly taught to students to support demonstrating each skill indicator. In MYP workshops, the term strategy is sometimes used to represent a format of the learning experience through which that skill is learned. For instance, the examples they show are group discussion, pair share, journaling, things like that. However, in this session today, I'm going to use this term to mean something much more specific. I'm going to use it to mean an identifiable method, process, procedure, protocol, routine, or set of steps that can be explicitly taught and practiced that students can use to demonstrate a skill indicator. For example, for the skill indicator, manage and resolve conflict, that's a type of skill that's important in working effectively with others during collaboration. And to support students in being able to manage and resolve conflict, a school might decide to teach and consistently practice one strategy across the school or a set of increasingly complex strategies over the course of the school, such as win-win conflict management, STAR, conflict resolution steps, or 4-step problem solving. Those are 3 names of conflict management strategies that exist out there. For this session, these are the labels that I'll be using for the 4 levels of organization, from largest to smallest: skill categories, skill clusters, skill indicators, and skill strategies. There are a few more terms that I think it's really important to clarify. Anybody of you in the MYP who have gone to workshops, ATL workshops, we could have a way longer discussion about the guidance provided about the terms explicit and implicit in some of those workshops. But in this session, I'm going to be using these terms like this. I'll be using explicit, teaching, and support of ATL skills to mean teaching and guiding students in learning and practicing a specific skill strategy through clear, unambiguous, and detailed instruction on how to use the strategy. For example, a note-taking strategy such as Cornell notes could be taught and used to take notes in any content area. So these strategies are not tied to content, but I believe that in many cases, it's helpful to teach them with students actually taking notes on a real content area. So yeah, I won't get into the whole MYP explicit, implicit, but it's very clear. It's taught step by step. That's what I mean by explicit. By implicit, that means that when a skill is in practice, it's embedded into the learning experience or task. So students are using a skill during a learning experience or task. It's not a separate guided learning experience specifically focused on learning the steps of that strategy. The teacher might support them if they're running into trouble, but implicitly it's just built in to the learning experience. And there's 2 more terms that are helpful to define: the general or core ATL skills and the discipline-specific ATL skills. General or core skills are foundational skills that are important in all subject groups and that all subject teachers will support. It's important to identify those. And discipline-specific skills are skills that are particular to a specific discipline and are needed to support students in effectively demonstrating those subject group objectives, participating in discipline-specific learning experiences, achieving in discipline-specific types of assessment tasks. So PE might have some different presentation skills than drama, right? So discipline-specific might have additional skills in addition to those core skills. A document and phrase that we really need to unpack, particularly in the MYP, because it's part of the required coherent curriculum practices in the MYP IB standards and practices. The practice states that the school develops subject group overviews and an approaches to learning planning chart in accordance with program documentation. So even if you're a PYP or DP and you don't have this requirement, but if you're a continuum school, you're going to care how this phrase is interpreted. The subject group overview part of that requirement is fairly straightforward. There's a clear description provided in the guide, and they have example templates provided on the Program Resource Center. In this document, teachers briefly describe the main elements of each unit across the years of the program. But the ATL skill planning chart part of the requirement is less straightforward. The requirement is that the ATL skill chart shows vertical articulation of ATL related skills. So if the information in the ATL column of the subject group overview is detailed enough, it could be that whatever's written in the ATL column of the subject group overview might meet, for compliance sake, it might meet this requirement. However, in the program support materials on the Resource Center, it's also suggested that a school could take the information in the ATL column of the subject group overviews and create a separate table that shows when a skill is taught across each year level. This is an image of an example template that is linked in the MYP coordinator support materials. In case any of you have attended the Cat3 MYP ATL workshop, or you have accessed the support material pages on the Program Resource Center, you may have also seen an example document entitled ATL Skills Planning Chart. Unfortunate title for this document. This document describes how ATL skills are planned and supported in the school. So this information is helpful. Describing the planning of ATL skills could definitely be a part of documenting the coherent curriculum standards and practices in all IB programs. And because these types of descriptions can also help the school expand their thinking about how ATL skills are supported across the school, I've created an updated example. The example that's on the PRC is like from referencing the 2014 documents. So I've created an updated example of this document, and I will link it in the Padlet. However, contrary to the title of the document, I'm changing the name of mine. I'm calling it ATL Skills Planning, not ATL Skills Planning Chart, because that is not what it is. That is where the site visitors I talk to are in complete agreement that it needs to be a vertical articulation of ATL skills. So it's not just a description of the planning, it's actually a vertical articulation. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So this is a record of the progression of ATL skill development across the span of an IB program or a continuum. And the format and content of this vertical planning is not defined by the IB. The school can make whatever format and content works best for them. So the question becomes, how can we make ATL planning practical and effective? We're not just doing it for compliance to turn it in. How can we really make it practical and effective? And we're going to get into that with those 3 mind shifts I was talking about. And so to get started, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect internally, just silently to yourself, about whether this statement is true or false. IB schools need to teach the ATL skill indicators listed in the guides. What do you think, true or false? Right, I see you shaking your head. False, some of you, this is false. Schools do not need to plan or teach the list of ATL skill indicators identified in the guides. Even though that is clearly stated in PYP and MYP guides that the list of examples that schools can choose from, they can modify them, they can add to them, they can delete them. There's still some impression out there that these are required because they are listed, I think maybe this is why, they are listed in commercial online unit planning platforms. That's a whole nother discussion too of how to use those planning platforms, but not get sucked into the tick box mentality of just ticking off those skills that are in the list that they provide. So mind shift number 1, some of you already have this mind shift, so that's helpful. Schools can define their own ATL skill indicators, and I'm suggesting that they can also define their own ATL organizational structure. You can see that that part is in purple because, again, if your school offers only the PYP or only the MYP, you may want to check on the flexibility of customizing the sub-skills or skill clusters. The DP does not define a specific structure, so if your school only offers DP, the organizational structure is totally up to you. Again, as I'm proposing in this session, if you're part of a multi-program or continuum IB school, creating a shared organizational structure will promote clear communication and collaboration across the program. So just to make that point really, really clear, the 5 skill categories provided, they are the foundation of a school's IB program. Not to say you couldn't add, say you thought of a different skill category and your school really needed it, say spiritual practice or something like that was a category that your school values. You can add a skill category. But these 5 provide the foundation in all 4 programs. Again, single program, PYP or MYP program should check on modifying the next level of organization, but I would recommend creating your own skill clusters. Your skill indicators can be defined by the school, and all of the skill strategies can be defined by the school. There's so much freedom there. So when you're thinking about what to spend time on in vertical ATL planning, because it does take quite a bit of time, at least at the outset, got to make sure that you have time to have at the beginning of the planning. But it's important to decide if you're more interested in creating a document for verification or evaluation, or if you'd like to create ATL resources that are really practical and useful in planning and teaching. And hopefully you're all in that crowd on the right of deciding to create a helpful and useful vertical articulation. So from a compliance standpoint, here's an example of the type of chart that some schools create as a record of ATL skills. This type of record fulfills the IB requirement of having an ATL planning chart that shows vertical articulation. And this example is really quite efficient. But let's consider whether or not it provides the school with practical information that teachers will actually access. It's not just a document online somewhere. They'll actually access it and use it on an ongoing basis to inform planning and teaching. Okay, so this example is a 3-year MYP. So you can see just 3 year levels shown there. First of all, it lists all of the example skills provided in MYP from principles into practice. And this image just shows the communication portion of the document. Then it includes a column that identifies a shortened code for each skill type. They gave it a number. They really spend a lot of time on this. Perhaps they use these codes in unit plans, kind of a shortcut idea. Then it has columns for each subject group and a column for the skills taught in advisory. That's shown over here in lime green. Then they have check marks. They add check marks to show which skill indicators are addressed in each subject in each year level. It also includes columns that indicate whether students in each year level are intended to demonstrate each skill type at a novice, practitioner, or expert level. So they've worked really hard. They've tried to include everything. But if we zoom in on the skill indicator, take effective notes, it shows that students are explicitly taught some sort of note-taking skill in language acquisition over here sometime in year 1, and some sort of note-taking skill in individual societies sometime in year 3. It also shows that students are expected to be demonstrating expert level note-taking by year 3. So this format of vertical mapping might be somewhat useful in helping teachers recognize that additional note-taking, instruction, and support might be needed for students to become experts by year 3. But as a whole, it's much too general to be of much practical help in planning or teaching. So on the surface, it looks like, wow, so complete, this vertical articulation. And it would actually meet the requirement for having an ATL planning chart. However, when the visiting team would come, I mean, it's just in general, as far as being a teacher, it's not helpful, I don't think, at all. But then when the visiting team comes to ask you, how often do you access this document? Is it a living document? Is it just sitting on a web page somewhere nobody it looks at? Teachers would have a hard time really talking about how this type of map helps them. So if that type of chart is not helpful, what would provide practical and useful information in a vertical articulation of ATL skills? So to think about that, just in your mind, consider which of 2 types of ATL skill descriptors would help teachers clearly understand what ATL skills are taught across the program. Which option, A or B, would be more informative? A, you see that note-taking is taught somewhere. And B, you see that the note-taking strategy, Cornell Notes, is taught. Pretty clear that for planning and teaching purposes, knowing the skill strategies, which skill strategies are taught, would be much more informative. And from a student's perspective, which is more memorable and actionable? I need to take effective notes, or I could take Cornell notes. Again, I think it's clear that specific skill strategies provide much more practical guidance for students. So that informs Mindshift number 2. It is the skill strategies that are useful in planning and teaching and are memorable and actionable for students. The skill indicators, not so much. It's still a type of skill. So it's not too helpful or accessible in terms of getting those neural pathways to thinking about what ATL skills can I use in this situation. So what might that look like? So here's an example for a communication skill indicator, such as take effective notes. To begin with, the school would identify the note-taking strategies already taught in the school. For example, they might list out Cornell notes, color-coded note cards, different types of mind mapping, chunking, visual imagery. They might list out that when they're starting this process. So these are the ones that we already teach. Or for a skill indicator such as provide meaningful feedback, the school might identify the feedback strategies already taught in the school. For example, see, think, wonder, 2 stars and a wish, connect, extend, challenge, ladder of feedback. Those might be some of the feedback strategies that they are already teaching. Which brings us to the third mind shift that builds off the second one. A vertical map of ATL strategies can provide the most specific, useful information for practical ATL skills planning and implementation. Here's a very, very small example of what that might look like. You're going to be provided with templates that show this in much more detail, but this is just to show you what it might look like. So for a skill indicator, such as take effective notes, we can see that the specific note-taking strategies that are taught in the specific subject units in each year level. So to envision how this could be so informative for a teacher, imagine that we are a team of MYP year 3 teachers, and we're planning units in which students will need to take notes. And we're wondering, do we need to plan to teach a note-taking skill? We're making our unit. Do we need to teach that? So we could look at our ATL skills map chart and see that students are learning outlining, the use of imagery, and a tree mind map in MYP1, a bubble mind map and Cornell notes in MYP2. So perhaps we're thinking we only need to do a quick reminder about these options and let students choose. Or we may want to solidify students' abilities in, say, Cornell notes and add in the use of colored pens to aid in memory retrieval. And so it gives us way more information to base our ATL skill planning in each unit on. Whatever we decide, a vertical map of skill strategies provides much more useful information for us, particularly if the map includes links to descriptions of the strategies so that we can provide support that is consistent to what students have already learned. This form of ATL skills vertical articulation is much more of a living, usable document than a format that simply shows check marks that indicate that some sort of note-taking was taught. We need to include much more specific information. So let's just look at those 3 mind shifts again. Schools have the freedom to customize, to find their own ATL skill indicators, and I'm proposing also the whole organizational structure. They have the freedom to create those strategies that are useful in planning and teaching. They're memorable and actionable for students. And a vertical map of ATL skills strategies can provide the most specific and useful information for practical ATL planning and implementation. Okay, so we have those 3 mind shifts down. So the 3 aligned action steps. Simple at first glance. So the 3 action steps based on that is to create customized lists of ATL skill indicators. Second one, identify skill strategies for each of the skill indicators that your school decides to have across the continuum. And then you'll create a vertical map of skill strategies taught across the program. So action step 1, creating customized lists of ATL skill indicators. We'll look at that in more detail. Even just this one step can make a huge difference in really owning and making the ATL skills supported in the school tangible and practical. So just as a side note, this initial step, creating those customized lists, that can be done by the whole faculty in small groups during a number of planning sessions, or by an ATL leader or a small ATL team if your school has this. Or it could even be done by a coordinator or a team of continuum coordinators. Know that much more time is needed if the whole faculty is involved at the outset, but it can be a fantastic learning process. But if that's not possible, the process could begin with a single person or a small team creating an initial draft, and then the whole faculty can be involved at a later point to make any needed adjustments. It's not a static document. So involving the faculty is not only helpful for building understanding, it's also something that a verification and evaluation team will want to discuss with teachers. So there's 4 steps in this first process of creating the school's customized list of indicators. We'll consider each step in more detail, but for now, to get an overview of the 4 steps, they are: first, you'll create a spreadsheet with all of the skill indicators published by the IB. You'll be editing these lists, but they are a helpful starting place. And I have these already in templates for you, so no need to worry about that taking time. Then you'll analyze each of those skill indicators. Once the analysis is complete, you will no longer need that working spreadsheet. You'll then create a new spreadsheet, and based on the analysis, you'll identify your own school's customized lists of skill indicators. These are the ones that we want to have across our continuum. Finally, you'll add any additional skill indicators that the school decides are important. Like the one school that I worked with, very, very into teaming skills. They added tons of collaboration skills related to facilitating a group, leading a group, being a group member, things like that. So you can add in the skills that are important for your school. So let's break down each of those steps. For MYP, DP, CP, and schools that want to create a vertical ATL plan across multiple programs, create a spreadsheet with all of the IB indicators. So you're going to look at those ones suggested in the PYP, in the MYP, and even those few that are suggested in the DP. It's not quite as organized in the DP guidance, but it's still great guidance. So there will be 5 pages in that spreadsheet, 1 page for each skill category, and all of those skill indicators will be added. You can also add, in addition to, like I said, the MYP ones, start with those MYP ones, but you can also add in the what students do skills from the PYP and any other PSPE learning outcomes from the scope and sequence. It's hard for you PYP people to be spanning those PSPE learning outcomes. So in the schools that I've worked with, they've just woven in those into the ATL skills plan. So it's going to look something like this: 5-page tabs across the bottom. Each tab, the skill indicators are listed. Again, a template with the MYP skills already entered will be available in the Padlet. Okay, so this is just like your Scratch document. If you're planning a PYP only program, you'll start with the same 5 pages, one for each skill category, and then you'll start with the ATL skills listed in the PYP Learning and Teaching Guide, and you may also want to add in those PSPE, identity and interaction skills. We might want to also consider the skill indicators from MYP, from principles to practice, just to see some more choices. So the PYP one might look something like this. So step B is analyzing each skill indicator and editing. You're going to ask yourself this key question. Is this a single, clearly stated, and explicitly teachable type of skill? I was shocked, I have to say, when I went through and asked this question of each of those. I started with the MYP, but I was surprised across the board how many of them are not this. But if you say yes, then you're going to keep that indicator. Make sure that you can think of at least one explicitly teachable strategy that will support students in demonstrating that indicator. For example, the skill indicator, such as set goals that are challenging and realistic, that's a single skill, type of skill. It's clearly stated. Can we think of at least one specific goal setting strategy that could be explicitly taught? I think so. SMART goals, hard goals, WHOOP goals, micro goals, all sorts of strategies that could be named and taught explicitly. If you answer no, then you're going to ask yourself, well, if it's not a single clearly stated and explicitly teachable type of skill, what is it? There are so many options here. These are a few that some of the schools I work with have come up with. If no, it's not single, it's not clearly stated, it's not explicitly teachable, well, what is it? So they, in a column, they put what they think it is. Oh, it's vague. We need to rephrase it. It includes more than one type of skill in the same indicator. It's a duplicate or similar skill to something else listed there. It's actually an approach to teaching, like it's a type of content that the teacher just needs to keep in mind in his or her planning of units. It's a type of content, it's a type of learning experience, it's a type of task. It is already a strategy. It's not a type of indicator, it's already a strategy. So it's kind of like in the wrong level of your ATL planning. It's not useful for us. We don't want to have this skill, or it belongs in a different category. Okay, you can choose from these when you're doing this analysis, or you can come up with your own reason why it's not a single, clearly stated, explicitly teachable skill. Then you're going to put in what edits are needed. For example, oh, we want to rephrase it. We want to split up and have 2 skills instead of this 2 skills in one. It's a duplicate skill, so we're going to just choose one of them or combine them. Anything that's an approach to teaching, a type of content, just information for the teacher that sort of like that she needs to, or he or she, sorry, needs to keep in mind for their teaching process, you're just going to delete those. It's already a specific strategy. You're going to delete that and add it as a strategy to some other indicator. And you're going to delete the ones that aren't useful and move the ones that don't belong in that category. You would prefer it in a different category. And here's some examples. Is this a single, clearly stated, and explicitly teachable type of skill? Give and receive meaningful feedback. This is a common skill. We all put these in our unit plans. Okay, I see some yeses. Okay, it is an important process, but is it a single skill? Is giving feedback a different type of skill than receiving it? Might there be different types of strategies that we might want to help students absorb? So would it be helpful to us to teach 2 distinct types of skills? right? For example, a productive communication skill of giving feedback and a receptive communication skill of receiving feedback. So if it was me, I would choose to teach this as two distinct types of skills. So in the analysis of this indicator, I would identify it as multiple skills. And then for the action, I would say, we need to split it up. Here's some ideas. I might just like jot down a draft idea for a new way of saying it. Provide respectful, meaningful feedback. I know a bunch of strategies for that. And receive feedback thoughtfully. It's a skill to be able to receive feedback. It's a hard one. Adults have a hard time with that one. So how helpful would it be if we had some strategies? This person's giving me feedback. How can I thoughtfully respond and possibly use that feedback? Yeah. Here's another practice. Is this a single, clearly stated, explicitly teachable type of skill? Keep and use a weekly planner for assignments. At first, it appears that the answer might be yes. Maybe it's two skills. Keeping it and using it might be two different skills. And also, is it a type of skill, or is a weekly planner actually a strategy? Weekly planner, written weekly planner, online weekly planner might be different strategies for a skill indicator, such as use strategies to plan assignments and meet deadlines, right? So really analyze those existing indicators that the IB has listed. All right, final example to consider. Use intercultural understanding to interpret communication. Is this a single, clearly stated, and explicitly teachable type of skill? Huge, yeah? Can I think of a way to explicitly teach using intercultural understanding to interpret communication? Maybe not easily. Yeah, this is like, ooh, wow, it might be almost like an approach to teaching, or I just need to involve it in the learning activities. It's kind of vague, it's kind of huge. How can I rephrase that as a more clearly actionable type of skill? Here's just an idea. I would put in there, oh, it's kind of vague. I want to edit it. I want to rephrase it. I might rephrase it, put down a draft idea as something like seek to understand others' cultural perspectives, or even just seek to understand other perspectives. There's like, for instance, an example skill strategy that I can think of for this more specific skill indicator might be paraphrase question to check for understanding. I heard you say this. Is this what you meant? Is there something else that you need to explain to me? I'm not understanding the same perspective. Yeah. So those are just examples of the type of things that a school might consider. And here's an example of one school's analysis and action notes that will be available in the Padlet. It's not complete, but it gives you a good idea. And the point is that each school should create lists of skill indicators that make sense and are important and can be clearly introduced and actively developed over the years of the school's program. So when I post this on the Padlet, you can read through and see how this school analyzed those indicators and decided, look how many, see, only the ones in white: set goals, challenging and realistic, and keep an organized logical system of files. Those are the only two they kept as is. They rephrased, they moved some to a different category. They decided they don't really believe in learning styles, so they took it out. Using technology effectively and productively, they thought was a teaching strategy. They took it out, right? So you can do that on your own, and it's really, really thought-provoking to run through this and say, is this really a type of skill indicate? Does this indicate self-management to do this particular type of skill? Can I think of one strategy to teach? So then the next step is to create a new spreadsheet. This will become the school's ATL Skills Strategy Resource Bank. Such a valuable document. It's going to look something like this: 5 pages, one for each skill category, a column for the school's customized lists of skill indicators, a column for the strategies for the general or core skills, and then columns for each subject. Many of them will be blank, but if a subject team can identify subject-specific skill strategies, right? Like drama is going to have some very specific skill strategies that are different from design. Depending on your course offerings, it could be helpful to add columns for each discipline of a subject. For instance, for the arts, if you have visual arts, drama, music, you might want to have separate columns for those. So you will have a blank template that you can create a copy of and edit. That will be available to you in the Padlet. Some tips: add in those organizational subcategories in each ATL category. Use the IB suggestion or develop your own. I suggest developing your own, but again, if you are a single program school, you might want to check on that. Here's some examples. Here's the IB suggestion shown here for social skills. The DP doesn't provide tables. So in the MYP collaboration, social skills just has one subcategory, collaboration. And PYP, they divided into two subcategories. But if you're a continuum school, you want these subcategories to be the same so that you can track progress over time. Here's a customized example. This is a multi-school program that decided to divide up social skills into group membership, leadership facilitation, interpersonal relationship building, bullying prevention, right? They had some very clear separated subcategories or clusters so that they could more easily find and track these skills. Here's another custom example. This is shared in the PYP teacher support materials. They were a continuum school and they divided social skills up into respecting others, cooperating, accepting responsibility, group decision-making, and resolving conflict. So again, if you're a continuum school, make sure these subcategories are the same. So you're not cross-referencing all the time. Again, I'll stop making this caveat, but if you're a single IB program, check with your IB program contact about customizing those sub-skills or sub-skill clusters to make sure that you won't have a problem in your evaluation. So after that spreadsheet is organized into skill clusters, you'll add the single, clearly stated, explicitly teachable indicators from the IB list, the ones that you said yes to, and you'll add the school's edited and added skill indicators. And then this spreadsheet is ready for step 2. This is the next step. Identify general skill strategies for each skill indicator that could be applicable or used in all subject groups. That set of steps or process could be used anywhere. For example, as we looked at before, skill strategies a school might choose for take effective notes might be these. They're going to say, oh, well, this is what we want to do in PYP level 3. We want to use visual imagery. And then, they'll map it out and they'll do it from least complex to most complex, and they'll have a plan over time. What are those note-taking strategies we're going to teach across our continuum? You will have in the Padlet an in-progress example from one school that includes some general skill strategies in that column here. So where can you find skill strategies? I will link these sites in the resources column of the Padlet, but really start with the strategies you're already teaching. You already are teaching so many. And then you can analyze them. Are these the best ones that we want? Or do we do them twice? Should we just make them more complex rather than just teach them over and over across the year levels? But it does work also. Just type in the skill indicator, however you phrased it, and then the word strategies, and you can come up, you'll find many. Or you can search on specific sites, Project Zero, National School Reform Faculty as Protocols, Kagan Cooperative Learning, Lance King at dowlearn.com. I'll link all these. Lenny Dutton has an ATL toolkit. Jennifer Gonzalez with Cult of Pedagogy has many, many strategies. And let's say that you teach something, but it's not like a professional strategy. You made it up. That's fine. Just name it, make a name for it, put it in your strategies column, and then you'll have to take that step and write up a little brief description of it so that other teachers know how your made up strategy works. So you can link it in your resource bank. Big note to remember, this is not a huge library of potential skill strategies like Lenny's ATL Toolkit. It's like so many strategies. That's not so helpful for teachers in the planning. That's nice for getting ideas, but for your resource bank, it's only the strategies that will actually be taught and practiced in your school. Not like these are a million ideas for you. These are linked strategies that you're going to use across the years in your school. Maybe they phase out because they're so simple, but students will still have that really simple strategy back in their minds, or you can remind them for new students. But you're going to get increasingly more complex skills to be used in more complex situations. So keep it simple. Even one strategy that students can remember and master is infinitely more valuable than 20 strategies that students have barely practiced and they can't remember. So it helps for the adults to also master these strategies and use them themselves and be a role model for it. I'm going to use this strategy right now. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm going to do 3x5 breathing for a few minutes, right? They're saying it out loud. So you're going to identify a few strategies for those general skills useful in all courses. Then slowly over time, those subject group teams or disciplinary teams can slowly add any applicable subject-specific skill strategies. This will be a very useful, like ongoing, many times accessed resource bank. They can add strategies, learn strategies taught in other courses. And as I said, it's great to include links to those instructions for each strategy. So then action step number 3, you're going to create a new spreadsheet. This is for your vertical map, your ATL skills chart. This is going to identify the skills strategies taught across the program or continuum. So you're going to have those 2 often accessed spreadsheets, that resource bank of strategies and this vertical map. There'll be 2 templates for this step in the Padlet that you're welcome to make a copy of. There'll be one for PYP and one for MYP-DP. Even if you're planning for a PYP through DP Continuum, it may be helpful to create 2 spreadsheets with those same organizing sub skills or skill clusters. They'll share some of the same skills, and they should be accessible to both ends of the spectrum. The PYP teachers should be able to access the MYP-DP, and the MYP-DP should be able to access the PYP one to see what has come before and what's going to come later. So it may be helpful to create those 2 spreadsheets that teachers across all programs can access, just so that there's not so much scrolling needed. Yeah, just the practical act of scrolling can get to be a lot. Again, it'll have 5 pages, one for each skill category, a column for the school's customized skill indicators. You'll just copy and paste from that previous resource bank, and 2 columns for each year level, just like in the MYP example. This is where teachers can identify the skill strategies that are taught in specific units. So again, start with the skill strategies that are already being explicitly taught. And like I said, if you are doing a strategy, but there's no like professional name for it, go ahead, create a name for it and add a link. There may be many blanks when you start. That's fine. If over time you're revisiting these documents in your grade level and vertical meetings, and you're like, wow, we've never even put a strategy in for this indicator, you can think about, is that skill indicator really needed? Should we delete it? Or might we need to focus on finding or developing a strategy to teach the skill? If we think it's important, then we need to teach it. So consider it as an evolving process, ongoing revisions, additions, and deletions. It should be a living document, meaning that teachers access the map to inform their own unit planning and skill teaching. It's also accessed during grade level and subject team meetings to review and discuss ATL development. What strategies are working well for you? What might need to be tweaked? What new strategies might be helpful? So ongoing discussion about those strategies and the sequence in which they're taught. So just as a summary, there are 3 spreadsheets involved in this process. The first one is the analysis of the example skill indicators suggested by the IB. Once you've completed that initial analysis and editing, you no longer need that spreadsheet. So there will be 2 active spreadsheets that teachers will access on an ongoing basis. The ATL Skills Strategies Resource Bank, which starts with the school's customized organization and lists of skill indicators, and it includes the skill strategies that the school has identified for each skill indicator and links to instructions to each of those strategies. The second map is the vertical map of those strategies. Okay, final tip before we get to Q&A. We're at 12:30 now, so I'm sorry we did have a late start, but we'll get there. The final tip about assessment. ATL skills are not formally assessed or graded in the IB, just as a bottom line. However, teachers are intended to provide students with regular targeted feedback on their development of ATL skills through learning engagements and formative assessment. The feedback should be very specific. It should include specific elements of a skill that the student's doing well and that the student needs to strengthen. Once you make that switch over to strategies, this is going to be much easier than those vague skill indicators. Students can provide peers with formative feedback on ATL skill development. They can self-assess their perceived proficiency in specific ATL skills. The IB suggests some descriptors for that self-assessment scale, and here's another example that makes it more tangible for students. They could use this to gauge and track their own progress. I can copy others, or I need step-by-step. I need a little bit of reminding. I can independently demonstrate it, or I can confidently select and demonstrate the skill. I could teach it. Another suggestion is, rather than naming these beginning, developing, using, sharing, is to name them stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, because those don't have any kind of connotation with them. It means, oh, there's a continuum of learning this. And what are you at? Are you at stage 1? That's normal. Yeah, it's not, ooh, I'm kind of embarrassed, I'm a beginner. So if you rename these in stages, it can make a big difference. That's what I suggested in the question that Amrit put onto the Google Doc Q&A. Any forms of feedback beyond those formative feedback methods in reports, for example, is a school-based decision, but some ideas that still align with the developmental intentions of IB could be to include in subject reports identification of the ATL skills taught in each unit over the report period, personalized comments that identify the student's strengths and areas needing further development in specific skill strategies. So if you're talking about those skill strategies, you could still share with parents, oh, they're at stage 2 of learning this strategy. Yeah, it doesn't have any negative connotation. We still have some way to go. And here are some tips. So sometimes, big caution on this, schools switching over to IB from just a traditional school. Sometimes schools try to replace their previous non-IB behavior reports with a similar type of ATL report. For example, with indicators such as points, levels, or a scale such as excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. These forms of indicators are sometimes used because they're fairly simple, they're quick for teachers to provide in reports. However, they tend to serve more as attempts at behavior management than as a way to support students in their ATL skill development. So if your school currently uses this type of reporting on ATL skills, it may be worthwhile to take another look at the outcome intentions of such a system. All right, so we're here at the end. 3 mind shifts. Yep, define your own ATL indicators. You find those ATL skill strategies and create the vertical map using strategies, not those indicators. Action steps, create customized lists, identify strategies, and create a vertical map of skill strategies taught across the program. Woo! All right, we're only 4 minutes over. So there's a lot of talking, sorry about that. When I do it over a course of a day, we of course have groups and breakout sessions where people analyze the skill indicators and have some practice with that, but you will have all the tools you need to do that with your teams. So no time in 90 minutes, but you will be able to do that on your own. So if you need to get going, no problem. If you have questions, you want to stick around, feel free. And for those of you leaving, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us. It's so hard on a school day in the afternoon, and I just wish you all the best and stay safe and well, and feel free to email me, right? I'm going to put my little email right here. If you have specific questions after you try these steps.
Yes, Diane, that was so wonderful. Thank you again on behalf of IPSO for joining us and going through that process. I know I took a lot of information in. It was very, very informative. So thank you so much. I have posted the link in the chat again, just, maybe you're going to take all of the information, you're gonna let it sink in. Maybe you're gonna wait till the recording is released, watched again, but please feel free to post your questions in that Google Doc, which will be open till the 22nd. And then Diane will happily answer those questions as well, but I'm happy to go through. So right now, Diane, there is one question that's in the Google Doc. And if you're willing to answer it, that would be greatly appreciated. So the question we have here is, we have DP only, which begins in grade 11, but we have grade 9 and 10 too. Recently, a guidance counselor commented about how it seems too many students that jump between grade 10 and grade 11 is massive. This is regardless of whether they're in DP or the Ontario curriculum. I would like to look at how we can help students negotiate this jump. What would be the first step with regards to ATL skills planning?
Yeah, I'm so glad, Jean, that you asked this question, because I forgot to mention that if your school is a single program, but it has a non-IB program prior or even after your program, like in your question, you have a different, just a non-IB prior in grades 9 and 10. I would follow the same exact thing, and in 9 and 10, I would just start incorporating backwards mapping from what they need in DP. Right? So you're picking those things the skills that they are going to need, and that the DP teachers might want to access the MYP and even PYP. I like some of the PYP descriptors. So access those, start the same exact process, and maybe get a little ATL team together that's part of the 9-10 team, right? And the DP team. So whoever is super interested in ATL skills and is feeling worried for their students, they might be good candidates to be on it. You need to be, involved, not one of the naysayers to be part of the planning team. But I would start the same process. List them all. The DP teachers are going to have a lot to say about what do our skills need, what do our students need, and then backwards map down to grade 9 using the same languaging, even though they're not an MYP school. Does that make sense? Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. Very clear. Excellent. I have another one that's currently being typed out, Fabio. I see. Good skill indicators. Oh, sorry. It's typing as anonymous wombat and it's currently covering the wording I need to read. There we go. Could skill indicators be changed in ManageBack? Could your charts be stored in ManageBack?
You know what? I think so. I mean, we'd have to check for sure. I have done a lot of work with ManageBack, and I was pushing for this in our last work together when we were doing some revisions on their unit planner. But I think on the back end, you might be able, just like how you can you can make task specific rubrics, on the back end. You may be able to, I don't know about deleting all of those. We'd have to check more closely with them, but what I would suggest is not even, maybe, I don't know. I mean, you could still use those tick boxes on ManageBack, but what's really valuable is their details text box. So it's not going to help you with mapping. And that mapping, if it's only doing ATL categories anyway, the automatic mapping, it's not much use anyway. In a practical sense, it does kind of give you an overview of what's been skipped and what happens often and what maybe needs more support. But in a practical way of teachers actually seeing the skills that are taught over time, it's not all that practical. So that text box where you're entering in the skills and the either the objectives or learning experience or summative tasks that those skills are intended to support, and then also identifying the strategy, the specific strategy, that makes a very, very clear detailed text box in that ManageBack. But in terms of that tick box idea, we'd have to check more with them to see if those can be replaced or adapted. But I think that these separate documents outside of ManageBack are going to be way more helpful than the analytics in ManageBack, the ATL analytics.
Perfect. Thank you. There are no more that are in, no more. Oh, I see another one coming through. Would you recommend using the templates in the Padlet for PYP? Or is there another format? Sorry, they're typing out. We should use.
Yeah. Again, up to the school. I am going to put a PYP specific number of templates, the blank templates. So you're welcome to use those or adapt them any way that works well for your school. I'm all about practicality and not the rules of a specific format, right?
Absolutely. Perfect. Are there any questions? Feel free to just jump on. Don't feel like you have to type them into the Google document. If you have a question, jump in, ask Diane the question.
I think that once you start getting into it and actually working with it and trying to plan, there might be more questions. So it's hard to envision what's going to happen at your school. And I know it's probably daunting as well if you've already made a stab at, say, one of those really extensive checkbox. You've probably spent a lot of time making that fairly unhelpful document, but it was a lot of time. So it's kind of hard to even picture getting started again.
Absolutely. Well, if there are no other questions, once again, thank you, Diane, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Greatly appreciate it. And please feel free to add to the Google Doc throughout the week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.